Picture this, it's the day before Thanksgiving 1971. Families across America are preparing for the holiday. Turkeys are thawing on kitchen counters. Children are drawing hand-shaped turkeys in elementary school classrooms. The highways are clogged with station wagons loaded with luggage and relatives. It is, by every measure, an ordinary American Wednesday. And yet somewhere above the dense, rain-soaked forests of the Pacific Northwest, a man in a dark suit and black tie is strapping a parachute to his back, clutching a briefcase stuffed with $20 bills and preparing to leap out of a commercial airliner into the freezing, pitch-black night sky. He will never be seen again. Not his body, not his parachute, not most of the money, just gone, swallowed by the darkness, the trees, the rain, and history. And for more than 50 years, the world has never stopped asking the same burning question: who was D.B. Cooper, and how on earth did he get away with it? This is not just a crime story. This is the greatest unsolved mystery in American aviation history. It is a tale that has consumed FBI agents, armchair detectives, journalists, novelists, filmmakers, and ordinary people who simply cannot let it go. It is a story about audacity, breathtaking, almost supernatural audacity, and about the strange, complicated relationship Americans have always had with the clever outlaw, the man who thumbs his nose at authority and simply walks away. Or in this case, jumps away, into the void, into legend. Let's go back to where it all begins. Portland International Airport, November 24, 1971. It's a gray, drizzly Pacific Northwest afternoon, the kind that feels like the sky itself has given up. A man approaches the Northwest Orient Airlines ticket counter. He is calm, composed, unremarkable in almost every way. He's wearing a dark business suit, a white dress shirt, a black clip-on tie, and dark sunglasses. He carries a black briefcase. He pays cash for a one-way ticket on Flight 305 from Portland to Seattle. The flight is short, barely 30 minutes in the air. He gives his name as Dan Cooper, not D.B. Cooper. That name, the one that would echo through history for decades, comes later, the result of a miscommunication between a reporter and a law enforcement source in the chaotic hours after the hijacking. But we'll call him Cooper because that's who he's become in the American imagination: D.B. Cooper, the Phantom, the Ghost, the man who beat the system. The plane is a Boeing 727. There are 36 passengers on board and 6 crew members. It is not a full flight. People are heading home for Thanksgiving. Nobody is paying much attention to the quiet man in seat 18C near the back of the aircraft. He orders a bourbon and soda. He lights a cigarette. He tips the flight attendant Florence Schaffner, which she later notes is somewhat unusual. He seems relaxed, almost cheerful. And then, once the plane is in the air, he does something that nobody on that aircraft is expecting. He leans toward Florence Schaffner and hands her a note. Now Florence Schaffner, like most flight attendants of that era, occasionally received notes from passengers. Usually they contained phone numbers, flattering or not so flattering invitations. She tucks the note into her pocket without reading it, assuming it's more of the same. But the man in 18C looks at her steadily and says quietly, calmly, without any apparent emotion, "Miss, you'd better look at that note. I have a bomb." Florence reads the note. Her blood runs cold. The note tells her that he has a bomb in his briefcase. He wants her to sit next to him. She does. He opens the briefcase just enough for her to see what appears to be red cylinders, wires, and a battery. Whether it is a real bomb or an elaborate prop, no one will ever know for certain. But in that moment on that plane, it doesn't matter, because Florence Schaffner believes it, and her belief is all that Cooper needs. He dictates his demands. He wants $200,000 in cash, negotiable currency, unmarked $20 bills. He wants 4 parachutes, 2 primary, 2 reserve. He wants a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the aircraft, and he wants his demands met quietly, no tricks, no heroes. In exchange, he promises that no one will be hurt. He is polite about it, almost apologetic. One flight attendant later describes him as calm, thoughtful. Like a businessman laying out the terms of a contract negotiation, not a man threatening to blow up a commercial aircraft. The flight crew contacts the ground. Seattle-Tacoma Airport is notified. The FBI is scrambled. Northwest Orient Airlines executives huddle in emergency meetings. And here's where the story takes its first remarkable turn. The airline decides to cooperate. They agree to pay. They agree to get the parachutes. The FBI, aware that there are passengers on board, agrees not to attempt any kind of tactical intervention in the air. They will get the money together. They will comply. And they will try to track him on the ground. The money, $200,000 in $20 bills, is assembled in less than 2 hours. The bills are photographed, their serial numbers are recorded. The FBI is thorough. They believe that once Cooper tries to spend the money, they'll have him. The parachutes are sourced from a local skydiving school. 2 of them are military grade, 2 are civilian. One of the civilian reserves, it will later emerge, is actually a dummy parachute, a non-functional training chute that was sewn shut. Whether Cooper knew this or whether he selected the right parachutes by luck remains one of the many unresolved threads of this story. While all this is happening, the plane circles over Seattle. Cooper keeps the passengers calm, or rather, he instructs the crew to tell them there is a minor mechanical problem and they will be landing shortly. Most passengers accept this explanation. Some notice the tension in the flight attendants' faces but say nothing. The ordinary miracle of human compliance in the face of anxiety. Nobody panics, nobody tries to play hero. And eventually, after roughly 2 hours of circling, the plane lands at Seattle-Tacoma Airport. The passengers are allowed to deplane. They shuffle off into the terminal, most of them still unaware of exactly what has been happening. Some of them will not find out until they turn on the evening news. The money and parachutes are brought on board. Cooper examines the cash. He doesn't count it, but he fans through it with what flight attendants describe as practice familiarity. He selects 2 of the 4 parachutes. He ties some of the money to himself using the cords from one of the reserve parachutes. And then he issues his next set of instructions. He wants the plane to fly to Mexico City. He wants it to fly low, below 10,000 feet. He wants it to fly slow with flaps partially extended, at a speed no greater than 150 knots. He wants the landing gear left down. He wants the cabin unpressurized. These are very specific, very technical demands. They are the demands of someone who understands aviation, someone who has thought this through. And they present an immediate problem. A Boeing 727 flying at those specifications burns fuel at an extraordinary rate. It cannot make it to Mexico City without stopping. Cooper agrees to a fuel stop in Reno, Nevada. The plane takes off again from Seattle with a skeleton crew: pilot William Scott, co-pilot Robert Radixak, flight engineer Harold Anderson, and flight attendant Tina Mucklow, who Cooper has asked to stay with him in the back of the plane. Tina Mucklow is remarkable throughout this entire ordeal. She is calm, she is professional, she keeps the lines of communication open with Cooper, who continues to be polite, even gentle with her. He offers her a share of the money. She declines. He seems genuinely surprised by this. He tells her he has a grudge, against whom or what he never fully explains. She later says that despite everything, she did not feel that he intended to hurt anyone. She felt, in the strange and surreal logic of that night, that she could trust him to keep his word about that one thing at least. The plane climbs to altitude and heads south into the darkness. FBI agents and military aircraft are scrambling to follow, but the weather is filthy: rain, cloud cover, turbulence, and the pursuit aircraft struggle to maintain visual contact. On the ground, law enforcement agencies in Washington, Oregon, and Nevada are being put on alert. Roadblocks are being set up. Theories are being formed. And in the back of Northwest Orient Flight 305, D.B. Cooper is putting on his parachute. At approximately 8:11 p.m. Pacific Time, the crew of Flight 305 notice a change in cabin pressure. The aft air stair, a unique feature of the Boeing 727, a set of stairs that can be lowered from the rear of the aircraft while in flight, has been deployed. Captain Scott calls back to ask Cooper if there's anything he needs. There is no response. Tina Mucklow, who has been instructed to stay in the front of the aircraft, later says she saw Cooper standing near the back, the stairs already lowered, the roar of the slipstream filling the cabin, the black void of the Pacific Northwest night yawning behind him. And then he was gone. Just like that, gone. The crew lands safely in Reno. Law enforcement floods the plane. They find the rear stair still deployed, 2 of the 4 parachutes still on board, 8 of the $20 bill bundles still on the seat, and Cooper's clip-on tie. That tie will become one of the most analyzed pieces of physical evidence in the history of American law enforcement. For decades, investigators will examine it for DNA, for fibers, for any clue about who this man really was. It will yield secrets slowly, grudgingly, and ultimately incompletely. The search begins immediately. Hundreds of law enforcement officers, military personnel, and volunteers comb the wilderness of southwest Washington state, the area over which Flight 305 was flying when Cooper jumped. The terrain is savage. Dense Douglas fir forests, steep ravines, freezing rivers, ground so thick with undergrowth that you could hide an army in there and never find it. They find nothing. No body, no parachute, no trace of D.B. Cooper. Days pass, weeks, months. The FBI investigation, codenamed NORJAK, for Northwest hijacking, becomes one of the largest and longest-running investigations in Bureau history. Hundreds of suspects will be identified and investigated over the following decades. Every one of them will eventually be cleared, or die before they can be conclusively tied to the crime, or fade back into the swirling fog of speculation that has always surrounded this case. The FBI will not officially suspend active investigation of the D.B. Cooper case until July of 2016, 45 years after the hijacking. They do so not because the case is solved, but because they need to redirect resources. The case remains officially open, a file with no ending. But wait, let's talk about the money. Because in February of 1980, something extraordinary happens. A young boy named Brian Ingram is on a family camping trip along the Columbia River near the town of Tina Bar in Washington state. He is digging in the sand at the river's edge the way children do idly without purpose when his fingers close around something unexpected. He pulls it out. It is a rotting bundle of $20 bills. He pulls out more and more. 3 packets of bills, deteriorated and disintegrating, but unmistakably the same bills. The serial numbers match the FBI's records. These are Cooper's bills. $5,800 of the original $200,000, partially buried in a sandbar along the Columbia River, roughly 9 years after the hijacking. This discovery is both the most significant piece of physical evidence ever recovered in the case and, paradoxically, the most confusing, because the location where the money was found does not fit neatly into any of the theories about where Cooper actually landed. The Columbia River drains an enormous watershed. The bills could have arrived at Tina Bar from almost anywhere upstream. Analysis of the money's deterioration and the sediment it was found in suggests it was deposited there sometime in the late 1970s, years after the jump. How it got there, whether Cooper drowned in a river, whether the money was simply swept downstream from wherever he landed, whether someone else moved it, is another question that has never been answered. Now here is where the story becomes truly extraordinary, because the question of who D.B. Cooper actually was has never, not once in more than 50 years, been definitively resolved. And in that void, an entire mythology has grown. Dozens of suspects have emerged over the decades. Let us walk through some of the most compelling. There is Richard McCoy Jr. McCoy was a Vietnam veteran, a skydiver, a Sunday school teacher, and a man who just 5 months after the D.B. Cooper hijacking attempted an almost identical crime, hijacking a United Airlines flight, extorting nearly $500,000 and parachuting from the aircraft. He was caught, convicted, and sentenced to 45 years in federal prison. He escaped from prison in 1974 and was killed in a confrontation with FBI agents shortly after. FBI agent Ralph Himmelsbach, the lead NORJAK investigator for many years, believed McCoy and Cooper were the same man. The resemblance between the two crimes is striking: the methodology, the use of a parachute, the demand for cash, the calm demeanor. But other investigators dispute this identification. Witnesses who interacted with Cooper on the plane said McCoy's photographs did not match the man they remembered. The debate continues. There is Robert Rackstraw, a career criminal. Army paratrooper and conman who seemed tailor-made for the role of D.B. Cooper. Charming, technically capable, with a history of fraud, impersonation, and a willingness to take extraordinary risks. A team of investigators spent years analyzing coded messages they believed were hidden in letters Rackstraw sent after the hijacking, convinced he was confessing in cipher. The FBI investigated Rackstraw multiple times and cleared him multiple times. He died in 2019, maintaining to the end that he was not Cooper, though he was not above letting people wonder. There is Lynn Doyle Cooper, known as L.D. Cooper, whose niece Marla Cooper came forward in 2011 to claim that her uncle had confessed to the hijacking on his deathbed. She produced a guitar strap and a pair of children's toy walkie-talkies she claimed he had handled before the hijacking. DNA testing was inconclusive. The FBI investigated and moved on. There is Kenny Christiansen, a former paratrooper and Northwest Orient Airlines employee who was identified as a suspect in a 2007 book. His brother came forward after Christiansen's death to say he had confessed and that he had accumulated unexplained wealth after 1971. Investigators noted that Christiansen's physical description matched some aspects of what witnesses reported about Cooper, but other aspects, including height and build, did not match well. There is the theory, advanced by some investigators and researchers, that Cooper was not a single individual at all but rather someone operating with inside help, a co-conspirator on the ground who may have helped plan the escape and disappear the money. This would explain certain things about the crime that seem almost too well planned for a solo operation. The specific technical demands about the plane's flight profile, the apparent knowledge of the Boeing 727's rear air stair capability, the choice of a route that passed over maximally difficult terrain. And then there's the quiet, persistent theory that D.B. Cooper simply did not survive the jump. That he leaped into a freezing Pacific Northwest night in rain and turbulence at altitude with a parachute he may or may not have known how to use correctly, over terrain that would kill most people even in daylight and good weather, and that he died out there in the wilderness. That his body was consumed by the forest, by animals, by decay, by the relentless Pacific Northwest damp that can reduce organic material to nothing in a surprisingly short time. That the reason we never found D.B. Cooper is not because he was brilliant enough to disappear, but because the forest found him first. This theory is, in some ways, the most logical. The conditions of that jump were genuinely terrifying. The air temperature at jump altitude was well below freezing. Cooper was wearing a business suit and loafers, not exactly cold-weather survival gear. He was jumping at night over dense forest in the rain with parachutes he had selected seemingly at random. Even experienced skydivers have noted that these conditions would be extremely challenging for a trained parachutist, let alone someone of unknown experience level. The chances of a successful landing, navigation through the wilderness, and escape from a massive law enforcement dragnet while soaking wet, possibly injured, and carrying $200,000 in cash seem, on sober reflection, extraordinarily slim. And yet we never found him, we never found his body, we never found his parachute. We found a handful of his money years later in a river in a way that explained almost nothing. And that absence, that yawning, infuriating absence of evidence, is what keeps the legend alive. Because here is the thing about D.B. Cooper that transcends the specifics of the crime: the money, the parachute, the trees, the rain. Here's the thing that makes this story different from other unsolved crimes, other cold cases, other mysteries that gathered dust in FBI filing cabinets. The American public did not want D.B. Cooper to be caught. Not really. Oh, they said they did. The official line was always that this was a dangerous criminal who needed to be brought to justice. But the cards told a different story. The letters, the songs, the movies, the bars named after him. The annual D.B. Cooper Days Festival held every year in Ariel, Washington, near where he is believed to have jumped. The merchandise, the mythology, the almost universal rooting interest across 50 years and multiple generations for the man in the dark suit and the clip-on tie who stuck it to a corporation, took their money and leaped into the night. America has always had a complicated relationship with the outlaw. Jesse James, Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger. There is something in the American character, something inherited perhaps from a founding mythology that celebrates rebellion against authority, that cannot help but admire the audacious rogue, the man who looks at the rules of society and simply decides not to follow them, especially when no one gets hurt, especially when the victim is a corporation rather than a person, especially when the crime has the quality of theater, of something that shouldn't be possible, and yet happened anyway in front of witnesses in the middle of the sky. D.B. Cooper became a folk hero almost instantly. Within days of the hijacking, he was appearing on novelty items. Songs were written about him. The hijacking inspired a wave of copycat crimes. In the months following the Cooper case, there were at least a dozen attempted parachute hijackings in the United States, so many that the FAA eventually mandated a design change to the Boeing 727 to prevent the rear air stair from being opened in flight. The so-called Cooper vane, a small mechanical device that locks the aft air stair when the aircraft's engines are running, was installed on all 727s. D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, changed aviation security forever. He also changed how we think about identity. Because one of the most disquieting aspects of the Cooper case, one that the FBI has wrestled with for decades, is how completely and perfectly this man shed his identity. He paid cash. He used a false name. He left no fingerprints of use. He wore a clip-on tie, the kind that leaves no impressionable mark on the skin the way a knotted tie might. He gave nothing away in conversation that could narrow down where he was from, what he did for a living, who he was. Every description witnesses gave of him was maddeningly ordinary: middle-aged, brown eyes, dark hair, medium build, polite, calm. He was, in the cruelest possible way for investigators, nobody in particular. He was every man, he was nobody. He was everyone and no one simultaneously. The composite sketches that the FBI released, and they released several, updated over the years as facial reconstruction technology improved, show a man who looks, with some imagination, like he could be almost anyone's uncle or neighbor, or the quiet guy in the middle seat who asks for a bourbon and soda and tips politely and never causes any trouble at all. Let's talk about what we actually know about him, the hard facts that investigators have been able to establish with reasonable confidence. He knew, or seemed to know, something about aviation. His demands about the flight profile, the speed, the altitude, the flaps, the gear were technically specific and coherent. He knew the Boeing 727 had an operable rear air stair. He knew enough about parachutes to select what appeared to be functional equipment. He spoke with apparent familiarity about the area over which the plane was flying. He did not seem panicked or uncertain at any point during the hijacking. These things suggest someone with military or aviation background, or possibly both. His physical description, middle-aged in 1971, probably in his mid to late 40s, means that if he survived the jump, he would be in his 90s or beyond today, or more likely dead of natural causes. The window for a living D.B. Cooper narrows with every passing year. The FBI's decision to suspend active investigation in 2016 was in part an acknowledgement of this demographic reality. Most of the suspects who have been seriously investigated are now dead. The witnesses who interacted with Cooper on that plane are old now, their memories filtered through decades of subsequent reporting and mythology, their ability to add anything new to the record diminishing with time. But the case will never truly close, not in the public imagination, because D.B. Cooper is not really a criminal investigation anymore. He is a story, and stories don't close cases. Stories grow, they breathe, they mutate and evolve and take on new shapes with each retelling. Every few years, someone comes forward with a new theory, a new suspect, a new piece of evidence: a parachute found in the woods, a confession from a dying relative, a coded letter, a newly developed forensic technique applied to the old evidence. The FBI fields dozens of calls and letters every year from people convinced they know who Cooper was. Forensic genealogy, the same technique that helped identify the Golden State Killer, has been proposed as a possible tool for cracking the case, using DNA from the tie. Whether it will ever yield a definitive answer remains to be seen. There is something almost philosophical about the Cooper case, something that goes beyond the specifics of the crime itself. It asks us to consider what we really mean by justice. If Cooper survived, lived out his life quietly, spent his money modestly and carefully, harmed no one after that night, what exactly would we want to do to him? He extorted money from an airline corporation. He terrified a handful of people on a plane, though by every account he worked hard to minimize that terror. He committed a federal crime. These things are real, they matter. And yet the FBI spent 45 years and untold millions of dollars in investigative resources trying to find this man, and they failed, comprehensively. The system that is supposed to catch people who break its rules was utterly, completely, and permanently defeated by one man in a clip-on tie with a briefcase full of wires and cylinders and nerve of steel. Is that justice? Is that failure? Or is it something else entirely, a reminder that the systems we build to enforce our rules are imperfect, and that occasionally, very occasionally, someone finds a crack in the wall and slips through it entirely and is never seen again? The last confirmed sighting of anything connected to D.B. Cooper was those rotting bundles of bills on the sandbar at Tina Bar in 1980. Young Brian Ingram digging in the sand, pulling history out of the river with his bare hands. $5,800, less than 3% of the total. Enough to confirm that the money was real, that the crime was real, that the man was real. Not enough to explain a single thing about what happened to him or where he went. The rest of the money has never been found. No one has ever successfully spent a single bill from that ransom in any way that led investigators to a suspect. If Cooper survived and tried to use the money, he was extraordinarily careful about it, or extraordinarily lucky. If he died in the wilderness, the money presumably died with him, consumed by the same forests and rivers that consumed everything else he left behind. There are places in the Pacific Northwest, in the deep timber country of southwest Washington, along the rivers that drain the Cascades into the Columbia, where the forest is so thick and so old and so indifferent to human history that you could believe almost anything is buried in there. Secrets, bones, briefcases full of deteriorating cash. A parachute tangled in the high branches of a Douglas fir, invisible from the ground, swaying in the Pacific wind for 50 years, carrying its secret in silence. Maybe Cooper is there, maybe he made it. Maybe he is somewhere warm and sunny, an old man with an improbable story he has never told anyone, watching the news reports every November on the anniversary of his crime and feeling something complicated, pride or regret, or just the quiet satisfaction of a man who got away with something that everyone said was impossible. Or maybe he is in those trees. Maybe the forest took him that night, quick and clean and permanent, and he has been part of the Pacific Northwest landscape ever since, returned to the earth he jumped towards so deliberately and so finally. We don't know, we will probably never know, and that not knowing is the engine that keeps the story running year after year, generation after generation. The mystery that refuses to die because its central character refuses, definitively, maddeningly, gloriously, to be found. D.B. Cooper jumped out of a plane and into American mythology on the night of November 24, 1971. He took $200,000 and two parachutes and the better part of America's sense of its own invulnerability with him. He became a ghost story and a cautionary tale and a folk ballad all at once. He became the answer to a question that nobody can quite stop asking: is it possible in this surveilled and documented and endlessly tracked modern world for a person to simply vanish? On that one night in that one plane over those dark and rain-soaked Pacific Northwest forests, the answer appears to have been yes. Definitively, stubbornly, impossibly yes. And somewhere in the trees or in the warmth of an ordinary life lived quietly under an assumed name or in whatever comes after this world, D.B. Cooper knows the answer to the question that has haunted America for half a century. He knows who he was. He knows whether he made it. He knows what the forest looked like coming up to meet him through the dark and the rain and the slipstream. He knows whether the parachute opened clean and true, or whether the last thing he felt was the terrible acceleration of freefall with no end. He knows, and he is not telling. The plane flies on without him, the money rots quietly in the river, the forest keeps its secrets, and the mystery of D.B. Cooper, the man who fell from the sky, endures.